So you were there today in Dublin Circuit Court, Clodagh, when taxi driver Raymond Shorten was sentenced for rape. Obviously, he's been before the courts on two separate trials, but this is a trial related to a young girl. What was the sentence he received today?
So yeah, today we were in court for, these were historic offences that happened in 2011 to 2013. He received a sentence of 14 years with 1 year suspended. So he's got 1 year off. So he's in for 13 years. He will be sentenced in this other case on Thursday. But for this one, the judge was delivering his judgment, his sentencing, and he kind of talked about how, this was particularly aggravated. There was, factors in this case that, for his sentencing, you have to take into account the seriousness of the crime, the impact on the victim, as well as the other aggravating factors, such as the fact that there was a degree of trust between Raymond Shorten and his victim, because obviously she was 7 years old at the time. He was an older family friend known to the family. There was more than one offence in this case, and the victim was extremely vulnerable, having recently lost her mother. The judge said that Raymond Shorten was utterly lacking in any compassion of the child that he was hurting. He mentioned how it was, there's a degree of degradation on behalf of the victim in this case. It was degrading for her to go through this, which was an aggravating factor as well. There was a headline sentence requested by the DPP of 10 to 15 years. Judge Naidoo handed down a sentence of 14 years, backdating it to the date of his remand in August 2022. He got 1 year suspended. The mitigation factors, I suppose, that were given by his defence was that his relationships broke down because of his sentencing, or because of the crimes that he was convicted for. So he lost relationship with his children, he lost relationships with his parents, his wife. However, the judge said that these relationships breaking down was hardly surprising and wasn't mitigating factors in themselves, but however did take that into account and decided to reduce the sentence by 1 year.
So, Raymond Shorten obviously has become famous, I suppose, or infamous, probably because of his the fact he was a Dublin taxi driver. And in the separate trial, we heard how really he was very predatory, preyed on drunk young women, put them in his taxi, promised to look after them, and then, at least in the cases he's been convicted of, raped and sexually assaulted them. And then we also heard during that trial other evidence about other women that at least he got to that very line of consent where he's dealing with very, very drunk women and has sex with them, and they are looking back and certainly feeling violated and deeply regretful. Through all of that, he maintained these were all consensual sexual encounters, and he kind of put up a very vigorous defence. But at the time, of course, the jury weren't able to hear about this other case which you've just spoken about, where there was this other historic allegation where, a very, very young girl who had just lost her mother, and he raped her. Kind of just that range of offences from, was she a 7-year-old child at the time, and then right up to these young women. And obviously then the other thing about Raymond Shorten, really sort of ordinary looking, unremarkable Dublin man. If you look at him on social media and supports football and has people leaving comments, But his I think the judge today even focused on his kind of lack of compassion for that young girl in an unimaginably vulnerable position.
Oh, completely unimaginable. When we heard the details of the case, the first time I heard them, they were completely shocking. But then you're kind of hearing more and more about the information behind it, the context of what has happened, that it was the day of her mother's funeral. And he was in a position of trust. He was supposed to be kind of somebody that would be there for her in the aftermath of what happened. And he took this opportunity of getting her alone to rape her. And she said this in her victim impact statement, and the judge referenced it again, that she was very young when this happened. She didn't really understand what was going on. But of course, being a 7-year-old, she trusted that, well, if this was wrong, why would this man be doing it to me? He's somebody I trust. But she kind of had a feeling that she knew it was wrong, and it wasn't until, she was in her teen years and she started doing sex education that she just realised exactly what had been happening. And this was 2020. The complaint was first made about these incidents that happened between 2011 and 2013. He was then arrested and taken into custody in 2022 in relation to this. But just previous to being taken into custody, earlier that summer, he had raped a young woman in his taxi, and there was another young woman even just weeks before he was taken into custody that he had attacked. And he obviously was under investigation before he was arrested. So he was under investigation at the time that he had committed those other 2 assaults in his taxi. But again, he had these women in very vulnerable positions. They were both intoxicated, and that seems to be his MO of using vulnerable people, vulnerable children, vulnerable women to, do as he pleases. And again, like we said when we talked about this before, but he has this very much this attitude of, I don't care, I'm not afraid, because like in one of the cases, he had sent her into her parents' house to get money to pay for the taxi ride. In the cases of the 7-year-old, there was other children had been in and around the vicinity. He wasn't left alone completely. There was people in the houses with him when these incidents occurred.
So, I mean, I think we heard today as well that he's coming back on Thursday, that the sentencing of those other 2 rapes is a separate matter, and that what happened today is just, it's held differently. They're not all lumped together. So I think we've had a lot of discussion recently about the length of sentencing people receive. You can see there the DPP asking for, the very higher end of this offence, and the judge coming very close to that higher end of the sentence. Obviously, with the multiple rapes in the taxi, that could go even higher. There's no indication, I think, of anything that the DPP have sought for in that case, is there?
No, I didn't hear any indication of any headline sentence being requested by the DPP. The issue was, I suppose, today, he was convicted for those 2 rapes in the taxi after he was convicted for the 7-year-old attack. So he had to be sentenced for the 7-year-old first, which he was today, and that was under Justice Naidu, and he has asked for the second judge, so that would be Justice Paul McDermott, to take into account in his sentencing any kind of post-release supervision, as well as kind of any issues around the probability of him being rehabilitated. So Justice Paul McDermott obviously today needs to go, and he wanted to know a bit more about the case from this morning, and he wanted to take those matters into consideration before he delivered his sentence. But yes, last week there was a sentence handed down to a man who was raping and terrorising, I'd say, his wife over a 25-year period, and he was handed down a life sentence, so it could go either way.
Yeah, I mean, life sentences for rape are relatively uncommon in the Irish legal system, but they certainly do happen. As you said, I mean, that was just one last week. It probably, because of the anonymity of it, it probably didn't receive the same level of attention as Raymond Shorten, where you can see a picture and a name. That was a case of a 67-year-old Carlo man who put his wife through, as she described, 25 years of hell, repeatedly raped her through between 1991 and 2015, and he received a life sentence. Over the years, there have been life sentences handed out. There's probably a couple a year handed out for rape or for sex attacks. I think there was one last year, a guy called Richard O'Brien, a 61-year-old from Ballyfermot, who committed a range of rapes and sex attacks on family members over a really extended period of time, and he was given a life sentence as well. It's not particularly common, but it does happen. And I suppose the difference between a life sentence, even, I suppose, as we said before, a life sentence typically is 17. If you get a life sentence, you spend maybe 17 years behind bars, maybe up to 19, something like that. But with a life sentence, as you were speaking about there, even when you get out, you can be brought back into custody without trial, because in theory you're imprisoned for life. You're getting out at all. You can be revoked without sort of a massive amount of process. So whether Raymond Shorten will face this or not, it's hard to say, but it's certainly he's going to be off the streets for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, everyone kind of, I suppose, I'm maybe of the generation that would see Larry Murphy as the monster, and that's kind of the poster child for, a dangerous, scary rapist. But when you look at what Raymond Shorten has been actually convicted for, and the assaults that he has carried out against other people, he kind of is more infamous, I would say, more dangerous than Larry Murphy was. I mean, Larry Murphy has never committed anything since that we know of. He's never been taken back into prison. He's living in London at the moment. And, you know, it's hard to see that there might be a day that somebody like Raymond Shorten is back out on the streets. Larry Murphy got 15 years, I believe, reduced down to 10. And after he served his time, you know, he moved on. And I suppose there is that kind of question about rehabilitation, and can people like that be rehabilitated, and do they deserve to get a second chance? And that'll be something that obviously the judge is going to have to look at.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the Larry Murphy cases and the Raymond Shorten cases, they're not directly identical in that there was a sort of a particular level of violence used by Larry Murphy, and Raymond Shorten might say that that violence was not obvious. However, the crime is clear nonetheless. Like, did he react today in court?
Yeah, I mean, again, he kind of has this very sad face. And again, you're not wanting to sit in court looking happy or anything like that. But he did kind of, when he was handed down his sentence, there was kind of a big breath in and a sigh, kind of really, I suppose, hearing that he's going to spend another, you know, at this stage, it's going to be another 11 years behind bars. Possibly not ideal. I mean, he didn't really have any mitigating factors. I don't, you know, there was the small bits of information about him losing his relationships, and, you know, there was mention that he was a model prisoner almost as well. But other than that, I mean, I'm not sure what he was expecting to hear today. So I'm not sure why he seemed kind of disappointed. At the end of the day, he's going to probably get, I mean, these sentences as well are concurrent. So he got 14 years for one count of rape, 14 years for another count of rape, and then he got 2 years for the sexual assault count. So they are all to run concurrently, so at the same time, which was reduced down to the 13, again backdated to when he was taken into remand, which was almost 2 years ago now. It'll be 2 years next month. But will come later in the week on Thursday. Will remains to be seen.
Yeah, and we'll be there to see what happens, and we'll give an update.
We'll be back on it. Thank you so much, Niall.
Thanks, Clodagh.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.